Oh, time while you punish me is the Hootie and the Blowfish song, and it's very appropriate. Hootie and the Blowfish are artist of the day.
We don't want to punish our guest by having him listen to us argue.
We're punishing our listeners.
Let's go to our guest line and bring on the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels, Jones Angell, joining us now. Jones, thanks so much for coming on. How are you today?
If it makes you guys feel any better, y'all are at the top of my power rankings of all the interviews I'm going to do this week talking about Syracuse, Carolina. So you guys are at the top. I'm fired up for it.
Awesome. We'll take it. Thank you for saying that. All right, so let's jump in on this team because, North Carolina was highly touted coming in. And, we didn't. Let me put it this way. What have you learned about this team through 4 games? Because they've gone out and they've looked impressive and they've taken care of business. You look at their opponents, and I'm not sure that anybody in the first 4 games is considered a world beater on this schedule. But they've gone out and they've won. What have you learned about this team through 4 games?
Sure, yeah, and I don't feel like the Tar Heels have played a poor schedule. I mean, they do have a victory over an SEC team, a Big Ten team, went on the road and won a conference game, and played an in-state opponent who is notorious for beating big teams. So I think Carolina feels like it's had a pretty good first 4 games to win all 4 of those and be 4-0 for the first time since 1997. I think to answer your question, got to go back to last year a little bit. Tar Heels were 9-1. At one point last season, and at that point had just won a road game at Wake Forest. That win had secured the Coastal Division championship for Carolina back when the ACC had divisions, and they were ranked I think like 10 or 11 or something in the country. And Mac Brown said he felt like his team got a little complacent at that point in time, and that complacency showed on the field. The Tar Heels lost at home to a team I think Carolina was better than in Georgia Tech. Then they lost at home in a rivalry game to NC State in overtime. Lost to Clemson in the championship game for the ACC, and then lost to a good Oregon team in the final minutes of the bowl game. So that's 9-1 to 9-5. Obviously not how you want to end. So I think Carolina felt like it needed to address a couple things in the offseason. That they wanted to become more multiple offensively. They didn't want to have to rely strictly on Drake May to be successful, and they have run the football better, particularly in the first couple games this season. They wanted to be more physical and effective in the red zone, which I think Carolina has done. And they knew and understood they had to get better defensively, because that has been the number one issue for the Tar Heels through the last several years. They've been able to move the ball and score, but it's been stopping the other team from doing so that's been a bigger challenge. So I think they've addressed those concerns, and now you're jumping into 8 straight games because Carolina's coming off its open date. So 8 straight games, 7 of which are conference matchups that are going to challenge Carolina. And so now Mac Brown talked a lot about going from good to great in the offseason. It's now time to see if the Tar Heels can take that step.
And they've got every opportunity, right, Jones? I mean, you look at the schedule, you touched on it there, 8 straight games, 3 in a row at home. They've got Miami at home. You look at their toughest games the rest of the way. Miami, it's a home game. Duke, it's a home game. They do play on the road at Clemson, but as we all know, Clemson has already lost 2 conference games. Is the feeling that, it's kind of ACC championship game or bust for this team? Like anything less than that would be a disappointment? Is that how far the expectations have risen down there in Chapel Hill?
I don't know if it's ACC championship game or bust, but I think the Tar Heels feel like they have a team that is capable of making it to the ACC championship game. I think they feel like they have the pieces to do that. Now, I think it's harder to do that now because you just take, for example, Carolina and Louisville. Let's just 2 teams that are still undefeated. Well, Louisville's schedule is a heck of a lot easier than Carolina's schedule, and there's nothing you can do about that if you're the Tar Heels, and these 2 teams don't play one another. So it is, I think, a bigger challenge to advance to the championship game than it used to be. It's a little bit murkier path. In the past, you knew it when there were the divisions. Hey, you knew at least everybody within your division was going to play a relatively comparable schedule. Of course, everybody had the crossover opponents, and those would vary. But for the most part, you were playing a comparable schedule. That's different now. And so it will be a challenge, but I think, and as you referenced, Tar Heels have some really difficult teams, including this weekend against Syracuse, still ahead of them. But they do feel like they have a team that is capable of advancing to that championship game for sure.
All right, and it all starts with Drake May, obviously. What can you tell us about this young man and what he's been able to do in the progression he's made as a player, both on and off the field? What's it been like to kind of see his development the last couple of years?
Yeah, Drake May came in as a pretty mature player and mature person, and so I think that got him ahead of the curve a little bit early in his career, and he redshirted a season as well, which is always beneficial, and sat behind a guy in Sam Howell who is doing it on Sundays now. And so that all those things were beneficial for Drake May, including the fact that his dad was a quarterback at Carolina and his brother played basketball at Carolina and won a national title. Another brother won a national title at Florida in baseball. Another brother was on a walk-on on the basketball team. So he's been around it his whole life. So he came in a little ahead. But he has continued to progress every step of the way in Chapel Hill. Now, his stats aren't as eye-popping this year as they were last year, at least as far as number of touchdowns thrown or number of yards thrown for. But Carolina doesn't need those numbers to be as high this year, and that was a goal, was for Carolina not to need those numbers to be as consistently high. Now, there's going to be a game. It might be this Saturday when Drake May is going to have to throw for 450 yards and 5 touchdowns for Carolina to have a chance to win. But the goal was every single week didn't need to be that. And I mentioned that 4-game losing streak to end last year. Some of that was that other teams were able to slow down Drake May more than he had been in the previous 2/3 portions of the season. And so Mac Brown said, look, we can't have everything relying on one guy. And so as good as Drake May is, Carolina is much more diverse in the way that it can move the football and score. Plays much better complementary football right now. Again, some big challenges ahead, but they've played much more complementary football as far as offensive and defensive success. And all of that is added to, I think, in total, a better team, even though Drake May's pure numbers aren't quite as high. Now, you look a little deeper, and his quarterback rating is higher right now than it was last season. He's the first Tar Heel quarterback ever to complete 20 or more passes in 4 straight games, and to complete 70% or more of his passes in 4 straight games to start a year. So he's actually completing more passes at a higher percentage than anybody's ever done it at Carolina. But he's just not thrown as many touchdowns or for as many yards to this point. So in total, terrific player. Carolina's been really lucky to have some really good quarterbacks over the last 10 or 15 years or so, and Drake May is right at the top of that heap.
All right, Jones, let's turn our attention to this opponent, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier that you think this could be a tough game for Carolina with Syracuse coming in, and we talk about this team day in and day out and week in and week out. And there's still some questions about how good they are, right? Because they started 4-0, but, they didn't really play anybody in their non-conference. At Purdue, that was a good win. But, Purdue's an average Big Ten team right now. And we saw Clemson come to town, and, Syracuse played them tough, but they just committed way too many turnovers to win that game. And so there are still these questions out there, here locally, just how good is Syracuse? From the outside looking in, as you look at this matchup, what are your impressions of this Syracuse team?
Yeah, 2 things, and I'll say 3 things. Number one, obviously they've been hit some with some injuries at the skill positions, which hurt you. When you lose Gadsden, he's such a threat with his size and how he can run. That's a hit. So you've got to figure out ways to adjust. And I know another starting wide receiver also has been injured here recently. So that's never easy when you're losing guys like that. Having said that, it obviously on the offensive side starts with Garrett Schrader. And there is nothing more frustrating as a defense than a quarterback that can run the way that Schrader can. And just in watching some of Syracuse, there are some designed runs, but a lot of it is just him feeling when it's time to get out of the pocket and pick up some yards with his legs. And he does that as well as anybody Carolina has seen to this point this season. When it's 3rd and 8 and you've defended it really well, and all of a sudden the quarterback just gets out and he gets 9 yards and the drive continues, that is demoralizing for the opposition, particularly when it happens time and time again. And I think you can see, too, and again, this is just my impression from watching, you can really see that he's an older player. He just seems completely in control of what he is doing, how he can be successful, and how that success melds over to the entire team being successful. I even, that game again, you mentioned the game against Purdue. He had that really impressive play action fake on the goal line where he kind of fooled everybody in the stadium and just walked in for the touchdown. And I think some guys would get really excited that they just had an incredible fake and made the other team look silly for a play. And he just kind of flipped the ball to the ref and said, "Yeah, that's 6 points. Let's keep going." And so you can just tell he is a mature guy that is in control. So that's number one. And then, Rocky Long is such a good defensive coordinator, and he's been in the game for a long time. And when you face a Rocky Long defense, they're going to be aggressive. There's going to be extra guys coming your way. You have to remain calm. You have to be able to pick those things up because there are opportunities on the back end because of that aggressiveness. But you have to be able to handle it up front to be able to take advantage on the backside. And so, to me, those are the two big issues for Carolina is managing a really good quarterback in Schrader and then not freaking out when you've got all the pressure coming your way from Syracuse's defense.
All right, last question from me. Are you expecting a close game? We saw the line come out, and I think Carolina's favored by 9, and everything that Carolina has to play for coming off a bye week and sold-out crowd, and we're trying to talk ourselves into this. This could be a close game. What are you expecting on Saturday?
I absolutely think it's going to be a close game because that's what college football is. There are a couple teams that are at the top of the heap, although this year I think is as full of parity as we've seen in a while, quite honestly, in college football. But I think you have, and pick a number, 5 to 7 teams at the top that are significantly ahead of the other teams. Then you get into a group of about 25 to 35 teams, of which I think Carolina and Syracuse are in that group, where everybody's about the same. And there's going to be differences from week to week, but everybody is pretty good trying to get to really good. And so I feel like both Carolina and Syracuse are in that group right now. I think they both have the potential to take a step forward. Carolina certainly feels like it is positioned to do so. But these are the type of games that end up separating that group of teams. And so I think both these teams are high-quality football teams. They're teams that are going to play in the postseason, teams that have legitimate thoughts of ACC championship game appearances, and these are the type of games that end up separating you.
How important is it for a school like, looking at the big picture of the ACC, for a school like UNC or Syracuse to take advantage of years like this when Clemson already has 2 conference losses? Are you looking? Is UNC looking at this as an opportunity to, hey, let's make a jump and try and keep it rolling?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to me, at least from the Tar Heel perspective, it's not necessarily the fact that Clemson's down or relatively down, right? Yeah. I mean, they're still really good. But to me, it's more that you've got a quarterback that's at an extraordinarily high level. Drake Mays don't come along very often. And so for Carolina, and what is likely going to be his final year, because he did have a redshirt year before being the starter full-time last season, you want to take advantage of those opportunities. You have a singular player that is good enough to change every game you're in and good enough to give you a chance to win every game you're in. And so to me, that's the urgency for Carolina, at least from the Carolina perspective, is that you really do have some pieces that don't come together that often. And so when you have them come together for a season, you want to make sure you take as full advantage as you can.
All right, Jones, great stuff. Really do appreciate the insight. Have a great call on Saturday, and hopefully we can talk again during the basketball season.
Thanks, guys. Looking forward to it.
All right, Jones Angell, the voice of North Carolina football.
Did that sound like you could have replaced North Carolina with Syracuse with everything he was saying there?
Yeah.
Like you got the year where the quarterback is good. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I thought his answer was interesting, too, about you've got all these teams that are kind of the same. So, varying degrees of in the mix of trying to improve yourself and take advantage of this year. And, Syracuse is in that group. Carolina's higher on that list.
And he mentioned something we've talked about this week already and earlier is Louisville has it on a platter.
Yeah.
Their schedule, the ACC helped them out a lot this year.
Yeah. That goes back to, we were talking about that in the preseason, about look out for Louisville this year, and here they are still undefeated. And it'll be interesting to see because Carolina doesn't play Florida State, and Louisville doesn't play Florida State. So it is possible that all three, and Louisville and North Carolina don't play each other, all three could be undefeated.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. All right, we're going to take a timeout. Matt Park joining us at 1:30. Dan from Wildcat
is standing outside.
Standing by, literally. He will join us next on ESPN Radio.